Hey, join me as I dive into my wild ride with Lena, exhausted, bruised, and hiding secrets. I trusted her training story, but the lies led me to a shocking truth. Watch how I confronted her, let her go, and found peace alone. Let's get into it. Lena's been coming home more tired lately, and it's starting to weigh on me. We've been together for a couple of years, and I've always loved her energy, but now she drags herself through the door, her face pale, her arms covered in bruises. It's been a few weeks since I first noticed. Small marks on her wrists, a dark spot on her thigh, and it's getting worse. Last night, she stumbled in around 9, dropping her bag, and mumbled, "Long day." I made her tea, sitting at the kitchen table, and asked, "You okay?" She nodded, saying, "Just training," but it didn't sit right. Still, I believed her. The exhaustion is constant. Every evening, she's the same, slumped on the couch, barely eating the dinner I cook, like pasta or chicken. I've seen her wince when she moves, rubbing her shoulder, and the bruises look fresh, purple, and yellow. This morning, she got up late, her eyes heavy, and I watched her dress, noticing a new mark on her back. I said, "Those look rough," and she brushed it off, saying, "It's from workouts." I frowned, but didn't push. Her voice was firm, and I wanted to trust her. I made coffee, sipping it, and told myself it was fine, but it wasn't. There's no closeness anymore. We used to cuddle on the couch, watch movies, but now she pulls away when I try. Last week, I reached for her hand, and she flinched, saying, "I'm sore." I let it go, turning on the TV, but the distance hurt. At night, she sleeps on her side, facing away, and I lie there, listening to her breathe, feeling alone. I asked once, "Is something wrong?" And she said, "No, just tired from training," her tone flat. I nodded, but inside, I felt uneasy. Something was off, and the bruises made it worse. I tried to understand. She's always been active, jogging, yoga, so when she mentioned training a month ago, it made sense. She said it was a new class, something to challenge herself, and I pictured her stretching, sweating. I even Googled it one night, seeing fit women in leggings, smiling, and thought, maybe that's it. But the marks on her arms, her legs, didn't match. I asked, "What kind of training?" And she said, "Pilates, stuff like that," with a quick smile. I wanted to believe her, so I did, though it left a knot in my stomach. The days drag. At work, I'm distracted, staring at reports, thinking about her. I come home, cook dinner, rice and veggies, and she picks at it, saying, "Not hungry." I wash dishes, watching her scroll her phone, and wonder what's taking so much out of her. One evening, I said, "Maybe take a break?" And she snapped, "I need this," then softened, "It's good for me." I backed off, drying a plate, but the bruises on her arms caught the light, and I felt a chill. I kept quiet, trusting her, but the unease grew. I noticed more. This morning, she limped to the bathroom, and I saw a fresh bruise on her calf. I said, "That looks bad," and she laughed, saying, "Just clumsy." I forced a smile, making toast, but my mind raced. I've started checking her bag when she's in the shower. Nothing odd, just gym clothes, but the smell of sweat and something metallic lingers. I sit on the couch after, the TV on low, and think about asking again, but stop. I don't want to fight, so I let it go, though it eats at me. The routine feels off. I've been jogging alone. The morning's quiet, trying to clear my head. At home, I fix things, a leaky faucet, a wobbly chair, to keep busy. She comes in exhausted, and I make her tea, asking, "How is it?" She says, "Tough but good," and I nod, watching her slump. Last night, I tried to hug her, and she stiffened, saying, "I'm sore," pulling away. I went to bed, lying awake, and felt the gap widen. I want to believe her training story, but the bruises, the distance, it's hard to shake. I talked to a friend. I called Tom yesterday, saying Lena's beat up from training, and he said, "That's weird. Check it out." I laughed it off, saying, "She's fine," but his word stuck. I spent the afternoon on a work call, distracted, and came home to find her asleep on the couch, a bruise on her neck. I covered her with a blanket, my heart sinking, and sat at the table, sipping cold coffee. I told myself it's her choice or life, but the unease wouldn't leave. I decided to watch, to wait, hoping it's nothing. The weekend's heavy. Saturday, she went out again, and I stayed home, cooking steak, eating alone. I thought about her training, the bruises, and felt a mix of worry and doubt. That night, I lay in bed, her side empty, and listened for her key. She came in late quiet, and I pretended to sleep. The next morning, I made coffee, watching her move stiffly, and said, "Take it easy today?" She smiled, saying, "Maybe," but the mark on her arm was fresh. I nodded, sipping my cup, and knew I couldn't ignore it much longer. After that uneasy morning with Lena's bruises, she finally gave me a story that sounded good, but it didn't fully settle me. A couple of days later, she came home less exhausted, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea I made. I asked, "What's this training about?" And she smiled, saying, "I've started Pilates and aerial gymnastics. It's amazing." She described it, stretching on mats, swinging on silks, and I pictured graceful moves like the videos I'd seen online. It sounded innocent, even beautiful. So I nodded, wanted to believe her, but those splotchy marks on her arms kept nagging at me. She got into it. That evening, she pulled out her phone, showing me clips of women twirling on fabric, doing flips in the air. "See? That's what I'm learning," she said, her eyes lighting up. I watched, impressed, lean bodies, colorful silks, and said, "That looks tough." She laughed, saying, "It is, but I love it," and explained how it builds strength. I made dinner, chicken and rice, while she talked, and it felt normal for a moment. I Googled it later, finding more videos, acrobats soaring, landing soft, and told myself, maybe that's it. Still, the bruises, dark on her thighs, didn't match the elegance. The explanation helped, sort of. The next day at work, I was less distracted, finishing a report, thinking about her words. She said the marks came from falls, from learning, and I picture her slipping on those silks. At home, I cooked pasta, and she ate with me, saying, "It's getting easier." I smiled, saying, "Good," but noticed a new scratch on her wrist. I asked, "Another fall?" And she nodded, "Yeah, just clumsy," brushing it off. I let it go, washing dishes, but the unease lingered. Those marks looked rougher than the tumble she caused. I tried to relax. That weekend, I went for a jog, the morning air cool, and thought about her story. Aerial gymnastics sounded legit. Straps, heights, effort. And I convinced myself the bruises were part of it. Back home, I fixed a squeaky drawer, keeping busy, and she came in, stretching on the floor. "Feels good after class," she said, and I watched, her movement smooth but her arms marked. I said, "You're dedicated," and she grinned. "Thanks." I made tea, sitting with her, and pushed the doubts down, focusing on her smile. But the marks wouldn't leave my mind. One night, she showered, and I saw a fresh bruise on her back when she changed. I said, "That looks bad." And she said, "Just the silks, they're tough." I nodded, making coffee, but my stomach twisted. I sat on the couch, the TV on low, and thought about the videos, graceful, not battered. I asked, "How often do you fall?" And she said, "A lot at first," laughing it off. I joined in, but inside, I wondered if Pilates and gymnastics could really do that. I went to bed, her beside me, and tried to sleep, the unease growing. I talked to Tom. The next day, I called him during lunch, saying, "Lena's into aerial stuff, bruises everywhere." He said, "That can happen, but check if it fits." I thanked him, hanging up, and spent the afternoon on a work call, my mind half there. At home, I cooked steak, and she ate, saying, "Class was intense." I saw a new mark on her neck, asking, "Another fall?" She said, "Yeah, learning a new move," and I nodded, but it felt forced. I cleaned the kitchen, watching her stretch, and told myself to trust her, though the doubts crept back. The week went on. I jogged again, the rhythm steadying me, and thought about her explanation. The silks, the mats. It made sense, but the bruises were too many, too dark. At home, I fixed a leaky tap, keeping my hands busy, and she came in tired but smiling. "Tough day," she said, and I made her tea, saying, "Rest up." I noticed a scrape on her knee, asking, "More training?" She said, "Yeah, just practice." And I let it go, sitting with her. The beautiful story was holding, but those marks kept whispering something else. I pushed it aside. That evening, we watched a movie, her head on my shoulder, and I felt close for a moment. I said, "Proud of you for trying this." And she squeezed my hand, saying, "Thanks." But when she shifted, a bruise on her arm showed, and I looked away, focusing on the screen. Later, I lay in bed, her breathing soft, and thought about the videos, elegant, not battered. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the next morning, I woke up, made coffee, and saw a new mark on her leg. I sipped my cup, nodding to her, and knew I couldn't ignore it forever. Lena's been pulling away in bed lately, and it's starting to get under my skin after her aerial gymnastics story. I try to trust her, but the closeness we used to have is fading fast. Last night, I reached for her as we climbed into bed, and she shifted away, saying, "I'm too tired." I nodded, turning on my side, but the rejection stung. It's been like this for weeks, her coming home bruised, exhausted, and shutting down any intimacy. I lie there, listening to her breathe, and feel this cold distance growing, a quiet worry building inside me. It's not just one night. A few days ago, I tried again, sliding closer, and she mumbled, "Not tonight," her voice flat. I said, "Okay," and rolled over, staring at the ceiling, wondering what's changed. She used to love curling up with me, laughing about our day, but now she's stiff, her back to me, like I'm not there. This morning, I made coffee, watching her dress, and noticed a new bruise on her hip. I asked, "Rough class?" And she said, "Yeah," but didn't look at me. I sipped my cup, feeling that she'll settle deeper, and didn't push. The lack of connection hurts. At night, I cook dinner, pasta or chicken, and she picks at it, saying, "Not hungry." We sit on the couch, the TV on, but she's glued to her phone, barely responding when I talk. Last week, I put my arm around her during a movie, and she tensed, saying, "I'm sore," pulling away. I let it go, watching the screen, but inside, I felt her drifting. I've stopped trying as much, just observing, and the silence between us is loud. I wonder if she's still with me, or if her training's taken her somewhere else. I sense her detachment. One evening, I suggested a date night, saying, "Let's go out," and she said, "Maybe later," her tone distracted. I cooked steak instead, eating alone while she stretched on the floor, wincing. I asked, "You okay?" And she said, "Just tired," avoiding my eyes. I washed dishes, watching her, and felt a knot in my chest. She's here, but not really. In bed, I reached out once more, and she said, "Not in the mood," turning away. I lay there, the room dark, and the anxiety crept in, telling me something's wrong. I talked to Tom about it. The next day, I called him during a break, saying, "Lena's off, no intimacy, always tired." He said, "That's weird for training, maybe stress?" I thanked him, hanging up, and spent the afternoon on a work report, my mind half on her. At home, I made tea, sitting with her, and asked, "Is training too much?" She said, "No, it's fine," but her smile was forced. I nodded, but the coldness in bed, her distance, kept nagging at me. I went to bed, her beside me, and felt more alone than ever. The pattern continues. Last night, I tried again, brushing her shoulder, and she said, "I'm sore," shifting away. I said, "From what?" And she said, "Class," her voice tight. I dropped it, turning on the TV, but my mind raced. Those bruises, her excuses. This morning, I jogged, the air sharp, trying to clear my head, but the cold in bed stayed. Back home, I cooked eggs, and she ate quietly, a new mark on her arm. I asked, "Another fall?" And she said, "Yeah," but didn't elaborate. I cleaned the kitchen, watching her, and the worry grew. I feel her slipping. One evening, I sat on the couch, sketching to distract myself, and she came in, collapsing beside me. I said, "Long day?" And she nodded, her head on the cushion, not me. I put the sketchbook down, feeling that distance, and wondered if she's hiding something. In bed, I didn't try, just lay there, her breathing steady, and thought about her training. The bruises, the rejections, it didn't add up. I decided to watch closer, the anxiety a quiet hum, telling me she's not fully mine anymore. The week drags. At work, I finish a presentation, but my focus is shot, thinking about her. At home, I fix a wobbly chair, keeping busy, and she comes in tired, saying, "Good class." I make her tea, asking, "Feel better?" And she says, "A bit," but her eyes are elsewhere. I sit with her, the TV on, and feel that coldness again. Last night, I reached out, and she said, "Not tonight," turning away. I lay there, the room silent, and knew the distance was more than tiredness. It was a sign she was slipping, and I was scared to face it. Lena's evasiveness about her training started bugging me, and I needed to know where she was going. After weeks of her coming home bruised and distant, I figured the studio address might clear things up. One evening, I cooked pasta, sitting with her at the kitchen table, and asked, "Where's this gym again?" She paused, twirling her fork, and said, "Oh, it's in the center." I nodded, saying which part, but she shrugged, "Not sure, different spots." Her vague answer left me cold, and I felt the first real sting of suspicion, though I didn't push. Yet. It kept happening. The next day, I tried again while she stretched on the living room floor, a new bruise on her arm. I said, "Maybe I'll visit your class sometime," keeping it light, and she smiled, saying, "It's not that exciting." I asked, "Where is it?" And she said, "Somewhere downtown, I forget the street." I frowned, saying, "You've been going for months," but she just laughed. "It's not important." I let it go, turning on the TV, but her dodge stuck with me. I sipped my coffee, watching her, and the unease from her empty answers grew. I pushed a little more. That weekend, I made tea, sitting with her on the couch, and said, "I'd like to see your studio, support you." She tensed, saying, "It's just a basic place," then added, "Lots of locations, hard to pin down." I said, "Give me an address," and she waved it off. "I'll check later." I nodded, but her avoidance felt like a wall. Later, I jogged, the air cool, thinking about her words, vague, slippery, and wondered why she wouldn't share. Back home, I fixed a loose shelf, keeping busy, but my mind raced with doubts. The lies piled up. One night, I asked again while cooking chicken, saying, "What's the studio name?" She said, "Oh, just a local place," her tone casual. I pressed, "Can I look it up?" And she said, "It's not online much," avoiding my eyes. I plated the food, eating quietly, and felt the gap widen. The next day at work, I was distracted, messing up a report, thinking about her answers. At home, I made coffee, watching her come in tired, and asked, "Same place today?" She said, "Yeah, somewhere central," and I nodded, the suspicion hardening. I talked to Tom. During a break, I called him, saying, "Lena won't tell me her gym address." He said, "That's odd, why hide it?" I said, "I don't know," and he suggested, "Ask straight up." I thanked him, hanging up, and spent the afternoon on a presentation, my focus shot. At home, I cooked eggs, and she ate, saying, "Good class?" I asked, "Where exactly?" And she said, "Near the park, I think," her smile tight. I cleaned the kitchen, watching her stretch, and knew her answers were empty. She was hiding something. The pattern continued. One evening, I sat with her, sketching to distract myself, and said, "I could pick you up after class." She said, "No need, I'll manage," her voice quick. I asked, "What's the address?" And she said, "It moves around, hard to say." I put the sketchbook down, feeling a chill, and said, "That's weird." She laughed it off. "It's flexible," but her eyes darted. I went to bed, her beside me, and lay awake, the lies stacking up. The next morning, I made coffee, watching her dress, and asked, "Sure it's just training?" She said, "Of course," but her tone didn't convince me. I started noticing more. That afternoon, I saw her bag, gym clothes, but a strange smell like sweat and metal. I asked, "New equipment?" And she said, "Yeah, silks." Her answer vague. I nodded, making tea, but the suspicion grew. Later, I jogged again, the rhythm steady, thinking about her empty replies. Center, park, no address. Back home, I fixed a wobbly chair, keeping busy, and she came in, saying, "Tough day." I asked, "Where?" And she said, "Same place," her smile forced. I sat with her, the TV on, and knew I couldn't trust her words anymore. The week ended tense. Saturday, she went out, and I stayed home, cooking steak, eating alone. I thought about her answers, the bruises, and felt a plan forming. That night, I lay in bed, her side empty, and listened for her key. She came in late, quiet, and I pretended to sleep. The next morning, I made coffee, watching her move stiffly, and asked, "Same studio?" She said, "Yeah, downtown," her voice flat. I sipped my cup, nodding, and decided to follow her. Her empty answers were pushing me to find the truth. After weeks of Lena's empty answers about her training, I couldn't shake the suspicion anymore. So I decided to follow her. Her vague replies, downtown, near the park, and those bruises had me on edge, and I needed to know the truth. That Saturday, she said she had a late class, grabbing her gym bag, and I saw my chance. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys, telling myself, just a quick check. I took the car, keeping a safe distance, my heart pounding as I trailed her through the evening streets. The city lights flickering. The drive was tense. I stayed a few cars back, watching her turn corners, her figure small in the dusk. She moved confidently, bag slung over her shoulder, and I thought about turning back. Maybe I was wrong. But then she slowed, and I parked a block away. Peering out, she headed toward a rundown building next to a nightclub, its neon sign buzzing. The place looked off, grimy windows, a basement entrance, and I saw two big guys by the door, arms crossed. My stomach dropped as she nodded to them, disappearing inside. This wasn't a gym. I sat there, stunned. The nightclub's music thumped faintly, and I wondered what she was doing. I thought about her story, Pilates, aerial gymnastics, but this felt wrong. I grabbed my phone, texting Tom. Following Lena, found her at a weird spot by a club. He replied, "Be careful," and I nodded to myself, stepping out. The air was cool, the street quiet except for the bouncers' low voices. I approached, my hands sweaty, and one guy eyed me, saying, "Members only." I said, "I'm with Lena," and he grunted, letting me pass. I took a breath and went in. The descent was eerie. I stepped down a narrow staircase, the walls damp and cold, lined with old stone. The air smelled like sweat and rust, and I heard muffled sounds, grunts, clanks. I passed a room with mannequins in armor, their blank faces creepy, and saw chains hanging from the ceiling. My pulse raced. What kind of place was this? I kept going, the basement stretching out, and wondered if I should turn back. But Lena was down here, and I needed to see. I moved quietly, the sound growing louder, my suspicion turning to dread. I got closer. Around a corner, I saw a heavy door, slightly ajar, and heard a voice. Hers. I peeked in, my heart stopping. The room was dim, with a suspended rig, and there she was, half dressed in tight gear, tied to the structure. A man was with her, not coaching, guiding her into some pose, his hands firm. It wasn't a class. It was something else, a game or ritual, and my mind reeled. I pulled out my phone, snapping a photo, the flash off, and stood frozen. She didn't see me, lost in it, and I felt sick, betrayed, confused. I left quietly. I backed away, my steps soft on the stone, the chains rattling faintly behind me. I climbed the stairs, nodded to the guards, and got to my car, hands shaking. The nightclub's lights blurred as I drove home, the photo burning in my pocket. I sat in the driveway, staring at the house, and thought about her bruises, her lies. I went inside, the place silent, and made coffee, sitting at the table, the cup trembling. I called Tom, saying, "I saw her, some underground thing." And he said, "What the hell?" I hung up, the truth sinking in. The night was long. I paced the living room, the TV off, thinking about what I'd seen. Her training story was a cover, and this, whatever was, explained the marks, the distance. I cooked pasta, but didn't eat, just stared at the stove. I sat on the couch, sketching random lines, trying to process, but my hand stopped. She'd be home soon, and I didn't know what to say. I lay in bed, the room dark, listening for her key, my mind on that basement. The next morning, I made coffee, waiting, knowing I couldn't unsee it. I braced myself. The next day, I went to work, finishing a report, but my focus was gone, replaying the image. At home, I fixed a leaky tap, keeping busy, and she came in late quiet. I nodded, saying, "Long class?" And she said, "Yeah," her voice tired. I watched her, the photo in my mind, and felt a plan form. I decided to wait, to confront her, but not yet. First, I needed to figure out what I'd stumbled into. That night, I lay awake, her breathing beside me, and knew the surveillance had changed everything. After seeing Lena disappear into that creepy basement, I couldn't let it go. I hadn't known what was happening. The image of her nodding to those guards stuck with me, and the next time she left for class, I followed again. It was a Friday evening, the streets dim, and I parked near the nightclub, my heart racing. I approached the bouncers, saying, "I'm with Lena," like before, and they let me through with a grunt. I stepped into the damp stairwell, the air heavy, and descended, determined to see behind that door, even if it scared me. The basement was unsettling. The stone walls felt cold, echoing with faint sounds, clanks, murmurs, as I moved deeper. I passed more mannequins in armor, their hollow eyes creepy, and noticed chains dangling from hooks, rusted and worn. The place smelled like sweat and metal, and my shoes scuffed the uneven floor. I heard a groan, low and sharp, and froze, my pulse pounding. I kept going, the hallway narrowing, and saw the heavy door again, slightly open. My hand shook, but I needed to look. Something told me Lena was there. I peeked inside. The room was dimly lit, a single bulb swinging, and there she was, Lena, tied to a suspended rig, her clothes half off, revealing more bruises than I'd seen. A man stood with her, not coaching but positioning her, his hands on her wrists, guiding her into a pose. It wasn't a class. It was a game, intense and strange, and my stomach turned. Her face was focused, not pained, and I realized this wasn't new. I pulled out my phone, snapping a photo, the screen silent, and stood there, shocked, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move at first. The man said something low, and Lena nodded, adjusting herself on the rig. It wasn't a scene from her training videos, Pilates or silks. This was darker, deliberate. I felt betrayed, my mind racing, but I stayed quiet, not wanting them to notice. The chains rattled as she shifted, and I saw more marks on her legs, fresh and stark. I took another photo, my hand steadying, and knew I had proof. I stepped back, the door creaking slightly, and prayed they didn't hear. I left in silence. I backed away, my steps soft on the stone, the sounds fading as I reached the stairs. The guards nodded as I passed, and I got to my car, the night air hitting me. I sat there, staring at the photos, Lena on that rig, the man's hands, my chest tight. I drove home, the streets blurring, and walked in, the house quiet. I made coffee, sitting at the table, the cup trembling, and called Tom, saying, "I saw Lena tied up with a guy." He said, "What the, get out of there." And I hung up, the truth sinking deep. The night was heavy. I paced the living room, the TV off, thinking about her lies, training, gymnastics, all a cover. I cooked pasta, but didn't eat, just stared at the stove, the photo on my phone burning. I sat on the couch, sketching random lines, but my hand stopped, the image too vivid. She'd be home soon, and I didn't know what to do. I lay in bed, the room dark, listening for a key, my mind on that basement. The next morning, I made coffee, waiting, the evidence in my pocket, my trust in her gone. I kept it to myself. The next day, I went to work, finishing a report, but my focus was shot, replaying the scene. At home, I fixed a leaky tap, keeping busy, and she came in late, quiet. I nodded, saying, "Long class?" And she said, "Yeah," her voice tired. I watched her, the photo in my mind, and stayed calm. That evening, I jogged, the air cool, trying to process, but the image stayed. Back home, I made tea, sitting by the window, and decided to wait. Confronting her would come, but first I needed to think. I lay awake that night, her beside me, and knew after seeing Lena in that basement. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning, but when I walked in, a strange calm took over. The photo on my phone, her on that rig with that man, burned in my pocket, and I knew things had to change. It was late, the house quiet, and I stood in the living room, the TV off, just breathing. I decided to pack her things, not out of anger but necessity. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet, laying on the bed, and started with her clothes, shirts, jeans, folding them neatly, my hand steady despite the shock. The task grounded me. I moved her dresser, pulling out socks, a scarf, her favorite sweater, and placed them in the case. The room smelled like her perfume, but it didn't hit me like before. I thought about her bruises, her lies about training, and realized the betrayal wasn't the act itself, whatever that game was, but the months of deception. She'd always seemed so modest, so honest, and that image clashed with the woman I saw. I packed her makeup bag, zipping it up, and felt a cold clarity settle in. I kept going. In the bathroom, I gathered her toothbrush, shampoo, the little mirror she liked, and added them to the suitcase. The silence was thick, broken only by the click of the zipper. I remembered her saying, "It's just Pilates," her quick smiles, and how I believed her. Now I saw the pattern, vague answers, late nights, and it all pointed to this. I went to the kitchen, packing her mug, a spoon she favored, and sat at the table, the suitcase by my feet. I made coffee, sipping it, and let the truth sink in. She'd hidden everything. I thought it through. The photos showed her half-dressed, tied up, not in pain but focused, and that man guiding her. It wasn't a class. It was something else, something she chose. I didn't care about the details. It was her line that broke me. I called Tom, saying, "I packed Lena's stuff. She'd been lying all along." He said, "Smart move, get her out." And I hung up, nodding to myself. I went back to the bedroom, adding her books, her journal, and closed the case, the weight of it real. The house felt different. I moved the suitcase to the living room, sitting on the couch, and sketched a few lines, trying to process. The drawing turned into a mess, and I tore it up, standing to pace. I cooked pasta, but didn't eat, just stared at the pot, thinking about her coming home. The clock ticked past midnight, and I wondered what she'd say. I fixed a leaky tap, keeping busy, the drip gone, and sat by the window. The street dark. The suitcase sat like a statement, and I felt ready to face her. She'd be back soon. The next morning, I went to work, finishing a report, but my mind was on that case. At home, I made tea, sitting with it, and heard her key in the lock. She walked in, tired, a bruise on her arm, and stopped, seeing the suitcase. I stayed calm, watching her, and she said, "What's this?" I said, "Your things." My voice even. She dropped her bag, saying, "Why?" And I felt a moment shift. I explained. I said, "I know about your training, saw it." Her eyes widened, but I didn't show the photo yet. I said, "It's not the act, it's the lies." She stammered, "I can explain," but I shook my head, saying, "No need." I packed her shoes, adding them to the case, and she stood there, silent. I thought about her modesty, her smiles, all fake, and felt the betrayal solidify. I zipped the suitcase, setting it by the door, and waited for her to leave. The night closed in. She tried to speak, but I said, "Just go," keeping it short. I made coffee, sitting at the table, and watched her hesitate. She grabbed the case, her face pale, and left without a word, the door clicking shut. I sat there, the house empty, and felt a strange relief. I called Tom, saying she's gone, and he said, "Good call." I hung up, lying in bed, the room quiet, and knew the lies, not the games, had ended us. The next morning, I woke up, made coffee, and started. When Lena came home and saw her suitcase, I knew the moment had arrived to face her, and the calm I felt packing her things started to crack. It was late, the house dim, and she walked in, her usual tired smile fading as she dropped her bag by the door. I stood by the kitchen table, coffee in hand, the suitcase a silent statement. She looked at it, then at me, and said, "What happened?" Her voice shaky. I took a breath, saying, "You tell me, what's with your training?" and watched her face shift, panic creeping in. She tried to lie again. She forced a laugh, saying, "What do you mean?" "It's just gymnastics," her eyes darting to the suitcase. I stayed still, sipping my coffee, and said, "Don't, Lena. I know." She stepped closer, her hands trembling, and said, "It's been a tough class. That's all." I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words, and said, "I saw you." Her smile dropped, and she stammered, "What? Where?" I didn't answer, just watched her, the photo burning in my pocket, waiting for the right moment. I showed her the proof. I pulled out my phone, opening the picture, her on that rig, half-dressed with that man, and held it up. Her face went pale, her mouth opening, but no sound coming out. I said, "Explain this," my voice steady despite the ache inside. She stared at the screen, then at me, and whispered, "It's not what you think." I leaned against the counter, saying, "Looks like a game, not training," and she flinched, her hands twisting together. The room was quiet, the clock ticking, and I felt the betrayal solidify. She faltered. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands, and said, "Okay, it's different." I sat across from her, saying, "Different how?" She looked up, her eyes wet, and mumbled, "It's a club, a private thing, performance art." I frowned, saying, "With chains? Bruises?" She nodded, then shook her head, saying, "It's safe, consensual, I needed it." I stared, the excuse weak, and said, "Why lie?" She didn't answer, just looked down, and I saw the truth. She'd hidden it, not the act. The tension built. I got up, making tea, the kettle humming, and she followed, saying, "I didn't want you to judge." I poured the tea, saying, "I wouldn't have, if you'd told me." She sat at the table, her voice low. It started small, got intense. I handed her a cup, saying, "And the bruises?" She sipped, saying, "Part of it," her tone defensive. I drank my coffee, watching her, and felt the distance. Her world was separate, her lies the wall. I said, "You could have been honest," and she nodded, but it didn't change anything. I stayed calm. The next day, I went to work, finishing a report, but my mind was on her words. At home, I fixed a wobbly chair, keeping busy, and she came in quieter. I said, "We're not done," and she nodded, sitting. I asked, "Why keep it secret?" And she said, "I thought you'd leave." I cooked pasta, eating alone, and said, "It's the lying, not the rest." She tried again. "It's art, not harm," but her voice broke. I cleaned the kitchen, watching her, and knew her explanation wouldn't fix it. She kept justifying. That evening, I jogged, the air cool, thinking about her story, performance art, chains. Back home, I made tea, sitting with her, and said, "Who was that man?" She said, "A guide," her eyes avoiding mine. I showed the photo again, saying, "Looks more," and she stammered, "He helps, that's all." I nodded, but the doubt stayed. I lay in bed that night, her beside me, and heard her breathe, her excuses echoing. The next morning, I made coffee, watching her dress, and knew the confrontation wasn't over. After showing Lena the photo and hearing her stumble through excuses, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed her gone. The kitchen table still held our cold tea, the suitcase by the door a silent demand, and her stammering about performance art pushed me over the edge. She sat on the couch, her face pale, tried to explain, but I cut her off, saying, "Stop, I don't want to hear it." She froze, her hands twisting, and I stood, my voice firm. "If you like that life, live it, just not with me." The air thickened, and I felt the weight of my decision settle. She tried to argue. She got up, saying, "Wait, let me explain," her voice shaky, but I shook my head, stepping back. I said, "No more lies, Lena. I saw enough." She moved closer, her eyes wet, and said, "It's not what you think. I needed this." I held up a hand, saying, "Doesn't matter. You hit it." I grabbed my coffee mug, sipping it, the bitterness matching my mood, and watched her falter. She reached for my arm, but I pulled away, the distance between us growing. I said, "You don't have to apologize, just leave." The tension held. She stood there, the suitcase behind her, and said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I leaned against the counter, saying, "But you did," with every lie. She wiped her eyes, saying, "I can change," her tone desperate, but I shook my head, saying, "Too late." I went to the kitchen, washing a dish, the water hot, and felt her watching. I turned, saying, "Take your things and go." She hesitated, her bag still by the door, and I saw the bruise on her arm, proof of her secret life. Staring back at me, I stayed resolute. The next day, I went to work, finishing a report, but my mind was on last night. At home, I fixed a leaky tap, keeping busy, and she came in quieter. I said, "We're done here," and she nodded, sitting. She tried again, "Can we talk?" But I said, "No, just pack more if you need." I cooked pasta, eating alone, and she watched, saying, "I'm sorry." I said, "Doesn't change it," my voice steady. I cleaned the kitchen, the silence heavy, and knew I wouldn't budge. She packed slowly. That evening, I jogged, the air cool, trying to clear my head, but her presence lingered. Back home, I made tea, sitting by the window, and she added clothes to the suitcase, her movement slow. She said, "I never wanted this," and I said, "You chose it." She approached again, her hand out, but I stepped back, saying, "Don't." She stopped, her face falling, and zipped the case. I watched, the street dark outside, and felt the relief of letting her go. The moment came. She grabbed the suitcase, saying, "I'll go," her voice small. I nodded, opening the door, and said, "Take care." She hesitated, then stepped out, the door clicking shut. I stood there, the house empty, and made coffee, sitting at the table. I called Tom, saying she's gone, and he said, "Good for you." I hung up, lying in bed, the room quiet, her scent fading. The next morning, I woke up, stretched, and made coffee, the silence mine again, her departure final. A few weeks after Lena walked out with her suitcase, I've settled into living alone, and it's easier than I expected. The house is quiet now, no late-night arrivals or tense silences, just me and my routine. I wake up, stretch, and make coffee, sitting at the kitchen table, the morning light soft. Her scent's gone, her things packed away, and I feel a weight lift. I don't miss her, not the lies, not the bruises, and I've stopped waiting for a key. I call Tom, saying I'm good on my own, and he says, "Took you long enough," with a laugh. I hang up, smiling, and start my day. Work feels lighter. I go in, finish reports, and focus on a new project, my mind clear. One day, I see her across the office, nodding to someone, but it doesn't sting. I nod back, keeping it short, and get to my desk, the routine steady. At lunch, I grab a sandwich, eating alone, and don't look for her. Jen asks, "You okay without Lena?" And I say, "Yeah, better," meaning it. I spend the afternoon on presentation, my thoughts on work, not her, and feel the relief of letting go sink in. I rebuild my space. That weekend, I paint the bedroom a warm gray, the old color too tied to her. I move the bed, add a lamp, and sit with a book, the quiet nice. I go for a jog, the air cool, and think about moving on. No anger, no revenge, just peace. Back home, I cook steak, eating on the couch, and sketch a tree, keeping the page this time. I call Tom again, saying, "House feels mine now," and he says, "Good man." I hang up, the night still, and enjoy the solitude. Time heals more. A month later, I take a drive to the lake, windows down, no one check in with. I walk the shore, the water calm, and feel free. Back home, I cook chicken, eating alone, and think about how far I've come. At work, I pass Lena in the hall, her smile faint, and I nod once. No pull. I finish a report, my focus sharp, and realize I'm not waiting anymore. That night, I lie in bed, the room dark, and sleep without her shadow, the silent to comfort. I let go of trust. One day, I see her with a friend laughing and feel nothing, just a guy who moved on. I grab coffee, nodding if she looks, and walk out, the cup warm. That evening, I hit the gym, lifting weights, and think about not believing words so easily. I cook pasta, eating alone, and sit with my sketchbook, drawing the lake. I call Tom, saying I don't trust like before, and he says, "Smart move." I hang up, the quiet strong, and know the lesson stuck. I stop chasing perfection. The next week, I finish a big project. The team's celebrating. Lena's there, but I don't care. I drive home, make tea, and sit by the window, watching the streetlights. I think about her modest, honest facade, and let it go, no ideal to chase. The next morning, I wake up, stretch, and make coffee, ready for work. I see her across the room, nod once, and turn away. I don't look back, don't seek perfect. Just live, the silence my strength, no return to her world.